Thanks so much, Chris and Keith, for the opportunity to be here tonight. And it's great to see a lot of familiar names and new names here on this talk tonight. And thanks, Tom, for really that excellent presentation and laying out what's known about PFAS in drinking water and groundwater throughout Barnstable. So I'm here tonight to tell you about the Massachusetts PFAS and Your Health study. This is a part, as I'll mention, this is a larger study that's being funded and coordinated by the CDC. And I really appreciate this opportunity to let all of you know about the study because we need your help. We need your help if you have lived in Hyannis and might be eligible to be in the study. We need your help if you have friends, neighbors who have lived in Hyannis. And even if you haven't, we'd love to have your help in getting the word out in the community. It really does take a village to do this type of work. So I will share my screen here. All right, and just I think many of you may know Silent Spring Institute, but we are an independent nonprofit research organization dedicated to understanding links between everyday chemical exposures and health, particularly women's health and breast cancer prevention. We were actually founded almost 30 years ago by visionary activists from Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition, including Cheryl Osimo, who's on the call tonight. And we were formed to be a scientific research organization to better understand how chemical exposures can affect our health and because of concerns about elevated breast cancer rates on Cape Cod. So I've been at Silent Spring since 2009, and I'm the lead scientist on the Massachusetts PFAS and Your Health study. So a few key points that I'll reiterate throughout my talk tonight. So we are recruiting current and former Hyannis families to take part in this study that's funded by the CDC. People who take part in the study can learn about their own PFAS exposure, as well as how their levels compare to other people. And by taking part in the study or helping us get the word out about the study, you can help scientists better understand how PFAS chemicals can affect our health. So a few key points. So, and Tom really nicely kind of laid out the timeline, but I wanted to reiterate that before 2016, Hyannis had higher levels of PFAS in some of its wells than any other water supply in Massachusetts, and was in the top 1% of water supplies in the US. This was part of, this was discovered through testing required by the EPA from 2013 to 2015, called the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule, Cycle 3. Vast majority of water supplies didn't even have detectable levels. At that time, they were looking for tens of parts per trillion of PFAS. The Mary Dunn wells really stood out from that testing, and up to 430 parts per trillion of PFAS alone were found in the Mary Dunn wells. So in 2016, the Hyannis water system started filtering to remove PFAS from the drinking water. And as been mentioned, all of the drinking water wells in Hyannis are now being filtered to remove PFAS. So that's good news, and that's something that we do mention when we're out in the community recruiting. But it's also important to recognize that because of the past exposures, we still can learn a lot from that, and that's why the CDC funded us to do this work in Hyannis. So I think this group is already pretty familiar with what PFAS are. These are chemicals that are commonly added to non-stick, stain-resistant, and waterproof consumer items. Even if you haven't heard of PFAS before, you've heard of Gore-Tex, Scotchgard, Stainmaster, Teflon, and many other consumer items. They are also a common constituent of Class B firefighting foams, and that's why we see high levels in the groundwater where AFFF firefighting foams have been used, like at the Fire Training Academy and the airport. And there are a lot of concerns about exposures to PFAS. So certain PFAS, especially what we call long chain PFAS, these are the PFAS compounds that used to be added to products, can accumulate in our bodies for years. And the evidence that we have suggests that they can harm our health in many different ways. Exposures to PFAS have been linked to effects on the immune system, especially decreased antibody response to routine vaccinations. And with COVID and antibodies on so many people's minds, this has definitely raised questions about whether people in PFAS impacted areas may in some way be more susceptible to COVID. PFAS can also affect thyroid function, kidney function, liver function. It can cause things like high cholesterol, lower birth weight for infants. And high levels of exposures have been linked to certain types of cancer like liver and testicular cancer. So there is a lot that we don't know, but there's still a lot that we don't know particularly about the levels of exposure that cause these effects and the effects of mixtures of different PFAS chemicals. So that's where this study comes in. So our study is actually part of a much broader study that's being funded and coordinated by the CDC and their Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, or ATSDR. And the name of the study is the Multi-Site Health Study because it's being conducted in communities in 7 different states that have a history of PFAS contamination of the water supply. And big picture, the goal for this study is to improve our understanding of how PFAS chemicals can affect our health. So back in 2019, Silent Spring Institute applied to be part of this multi-site study. And our proposal was selected among many others to be part of this broader study. So our specific study is called the Massachusetts PFAS in Your Health Study, and we're doing this work in 2 communities, so Hyannis as well as the town of Ayer. Just like in Hyannis, the public wells in Ayer were also contaminated. The largest source of contamination was the same types of firefighting foams that were used at the former Fort Devens military base. So the enrollment goal, so the goal in terms of how many participants we're looking for is 1,000 adults and 300 children, and children ages 4 to 17 are considered eligible across our 2 communities. We began enrollment in Hyannis in late fall of 2021, and the CDC has actually extended the end of data collection a couple of times. I don't think they will extend it again, so we are planning to wrap up data collection by the end of September this year. So Silent Spring Institute is leading this work. We also, our researchers are partnering with other researchers at Harvard School of Public Health and Eastern Research Group, and we're working really closely with Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition, Cheryl Osimo, who's on the call tonight, as well as Betty Ann Beavis and Kathy Engels, and they've been great and tireless allies in this work and have done a great job in really helping us to connect with many different parts of the community. So I wanted to tell you a little bit more about the specifics of the study so you might get a better sense of who's eligible to take part in the study. Again, if you want to evaluate if you yourself are eligible or if you can tell other people that you know about the study. So we're looking for people who lived in Hyannis anytime between May 2006 and July 2016. And you might wonder why we picked those specific years. So after July of 2016, none of the wells in Hyannis were exceeding the 70 parts per trillion EPA lifetime health advisory that they set in 2016. Before that time, at least multiple wells were over that level, and after that time, some of the wells still did have PFAS, but they were at lower levels. So that's that cutoff time. CDC wants us to make sure that we're including people who potentially got exposed to drinking water when the levels were still elevated. And then the May 2016, that's dating back about 15 years. Well, now it's 17 years. The study has had a number of challenges and delays, but the idea is that if someone hasn't lived in Hyannis for the past 15, 16, 17 years, PFAS do accumulate in our bodies, but the levels do slowly go down over time. And so measuring the levels of PFAS in someone's blood right now wouldn't, if they hadn't lived here in that long, wouldn't really provide an indication about their level of exposure. So we're looking for adults who lived in Hyannis during that time, as well as children and adolescents ages 4 to 17. And they can be eligible if they lived here during that time, or if their mothers lived in Hyannis during that time prior to the child's birth. We do know that PFAS can be passed along during pregnancy and breastfeeding. So a few other specifics. So again, because of this 2016 timeline, you don't have to live in Hyannis now to be eligible. And if there are multiple people in the same household, they can all take part in the study. CDC did specify that they're looking for people who might have been exposed to elevated PFAS from drinking water. And so they specified that people who might have had elevated exposures through their jobs, specifically firefighters or people who worked at chemical manufacturing plants, are not considered eligible for this study. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of what it's like if you actually take part in the study, there's really just a couple of steps. After you complete a short screening with a member of our study team by phone, we'll set up a time for you to come to our office. It's right on Route 28 in Centerville. And at the office visit, it's a lot like going to the doctor. We do collect a blood and urine sample. We do some body measurements. Some of these are routine: height, weight, blood pressure. We also have some special calipers for measuring skin fold thickness, and a special scale that tells us about body composition. After your study office visit, there's also a questionnaire that we do by phone. We ask you some questions about where you've lived and worked over time. Some questions about your water consumption. Part of the study is to try to recreate each participant's exposures from drinking water in the past. And we have some questions about your health history. One of the questions for the study is to evaluate whether people with higher exposures are more likely to have certain diseases. And then for children ages 5 to 17, not the 4-year-olds, 5 to 17, we ask those children to come back for a second study office visit, where we conduct a series of what are called neurobehavioral tests. So they're vocabulary exercises, drawing, and puzzles, attention. Basically, the goal is to understand whether PFAS may in some way affect things like learning or memory or attention. Okay, so that's what it takes from the participant side. So what is it that we're testing for when we're collecting a sample of people's blood? We are measuring PFAS levels, and that primarily tells us about each individual's exposure to PFAS, again, because these chemicals accumulate in our bodies often for years. We run some fairly routine lab tests, although your doctor probably wouldn't order all of these tests unless they were really trying to understand some unknown health condition. So we run a lot of things like cholesterol, blood sugar, thyroid hormone levels, liver enzymes, immune markers, and many other tests. And then we're also adding some additional tests that from a research perspective will tell us more about the other types of PFAS that we might be exposed to and carry in our blood, some more detailed information about cholesterol levels and different types of cholesterol. And we are also addressing the question about COVID susceptibility by doing measurements of COVID antibodies as well. So what will participants receive by being in the study? Well, we certainly hope that participants feel satisfied to know that they're taking part in an important federally funded CDC health study. And you don't have to live in somewhere like Hyannis in order to have PFAS in your bodies. Testing by the CDC has found that virtually all Americans have PFAS in our bodies. And that's because PFAS are also found in consumer products and in food. We also provide gift cards. So for people who take part in all parts of the study, adults will receive $50 in gift cards, and children will receive $75. You'll also get the results of the testing. So the routine lab tests can be provided to you typically within a month. The PFAS results take quite a bit longer. We do send those off to the CDC lab in Atlanta, and there's a long queue of PFAS samples they have to test. But we do share those results and provide information to help you interpret what the results mean. So how are we doing? So again, I mentioned that we have to recruit 1,000 adults, or we're aiming to recruit 1,000 adults and 300 children across our 2 communities. Hyannis is about twice as big as Air, so we had set a target for ourselves of 700 adults and 200 children to be in the study. So we do appreciate the hundreds of people who have taken part in the study already. But clearly we do have a way to go. We're just about halfway towards our goal for adults, and for children we're at only about 20%. So there's still a lot of work to be done. You might wonder how we're doing compared to the other sites. And certainly the other 6 sites have faced some challenges as well, particularly with recruiting children into the study. So this is looking, the results here for Massachusetts reflect the participants both in Hyannis and Air, and how we're doing with meeting this goal of 1,000 adults and 300 children. So the blue bars show adults and the yellow bars show children. So you can see that all of the sites still have a ways to go with respect to children. The Pennsylvania site has actually exceeded their goal already. And we're kind of similar to the other sites, but again, we want to come as close as possible to our target. Having more people in the study provides us with more statistical power to give us more information and more confidence in better understanding the links between the PFAS exposures and the wide range of health effects that we're investigating. So if you're interested to learn more, to sign up, there are a few ways that you can reach out to our team. We have a website. You can actually click on this link and provide your contact info, and that goes straight to our study team. You can call or text us, or you can also send us an email. For those of you who live in Hyannis now, you should have received actually several postcards by now, but we did send out a round of postcards just a month or two ago in your mail. And this is also a QR code, and if you're savvy with your phone like that, you can snap this with your camera and it'll take you right to this website here. So this is where all of you come in. So how can all of you help? Well, certainly if you have lived in Hyannis during that window of time, 2006 to 2016, I really hope that you will consider taking part. I know some of you on the call have taken part, so thank you to those of you who participated in the study. Whether or not you're eligible yourself, we really hope that you will share information about the study with friends and family. It's word of mouth from trusted sources is a really powerful way to convince people to take part in the study. We're also looking for support for our door-to-door canvassing. So we've been going out door to door, and particularly Betty Ann Beavis and our other MBCC volunteers have been doing door-to-door canvassing as a way to reach out to people. And this Saturday, we're going out and trying to gather a big group of people to go canvassing. But we do go out other weekends. So if you're interested in supporting the study in this way and this weekend doesn't work out, please do still reach out to us to let us know. Anyone who would be going out to canvass would go out with a member of our team, and we would provide training, including talking points about the study, as well as safety guidelines as well. We also have been doing extensive work to have tables at events throughout the community as well, kind of regular venues like grocery stores and the rec center, as well as all kinds of different community events, festivals. We'll be at Hyannis Open Streets this weekend as well. So you can help us with tabling as well. And then we welcome invitations to speak to different organizations as well, school groups, faith communities, and events like the one that you're having tonight. We're also on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So if you're on any of those, please follow our study account and share our posts too. So just to recap, Barnstable and really Cape Cod has an important opportunity to contribute to this major CDC study. And I would say really important responsibility to do as much as we can to support this important research. All of you can help us and help the study by raising awareness about PFAS specifically and about this study by either taking part, sharing information with people in your network, and helping with our recruitment efforts. And the study will help scientists better understand how PFAS can affect our health and benefit future generations. So here's my contact information as well. So yeah, thanks again for the invitation to be here and look forward to your questions.
Great, thanks very much, Laurel. You know, again, we encourage anybody on the call tonight to think about folks you might have known who lived in Hyannis in the past. I just remembered somebody who used to live there, and I'm going to reach out, and I hope you guys as well are able to either contribute to the canvassing or rack your brains and see if you can get another name over to Laurel and her colleagues at Silent Spring. And so we heard from Tom earlier, and we have Laurel here as well. We do have some time for a couple of questions. Usually we like to end by 8, but this was a really important presentation, I think, from Tom to go through the science and the details. So we're definitely going to close by 8:30. So if anybody has any questions, please unmute yourselves and fire away. Anybody?
May I say a word, please?
Sure.
My name is Cheryl Osmo, and I'd like to thank Keith Lewison for his incredible support throughout and always being there for us at Silent Spring Institute and supporting us with recruiting and canvassing. for this important CDC study. Thank you very much, Keith.
Thanks for that, Cheryl. Kate, you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to ask Laura, what's the time frame in terms of somebody living in Hyannis? Like, I have a daughter who was in college during this time period. So she was here in the summers. So she was here for 2 months at a time, say, over a few years. Would that qualify, or is it somebody that should be living here year round?
No, that's a great question, Kate, and something I should have addressed. So CDC specified certain things about the study. They didn't specify a minimum amount of time that someone needed to have lived in the study area. To my mind, as long as someone has lived here for at least a month, and we can kind of capture that information through a questionnaire, we would consider them eligible. So it doesn't have to be your primary residence, as long as you lived here at least a month during that time. I'll just add that sometimes people ask me like, well, what's your control group? You don't have another community that didn't have PFAS in the drinking water. And I'd say, first off, there's no control group because all of us have PFAS in our bodies. But even within our study population, we have people who maybe lived in Hyannis just for a short amount of time. Some people wonder if they're eligible if they mainly drink bottled water. And the answer is yes. As long as you lived in Hyannis during that time. Again, we want to have a range of people. Some people we think will have had higher exposures, especially if they lived in Hyannis for a long time. Some people have had lower exposures, so we have that range. So as long as she lived here for at least a month, we would consider her eligible. So
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kate. And just to echo what Cheryl said, thanks to Keith as well for being out there canvassing with us and for his support for all of our research efforts over the years. And Betty too, I see Betty here. Thanks for coming out with us and canvassing too. Great to see you.
Betty, if you have a question, please go ahead. Nice to see you tonight. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a question. I saw it in the chat earlier. It's for Tom. Tom, you'd mentioned the decision was made to just let the airport plume go and then filter the wells, which is all well and good for the drinking water. But what about the folks in Yarmouth and Mill Creek that are very concerned about the levels there? So who was the decision maker that made that decision, and how did they come to the decision? Who was consulted, and who made up the aspects of that decision?
Oh, that's a good question. Typically the airport's consultant, works as a private contractor licensed to do this type of work, evaluates the data, evaluates what the potential remedial actions are, and they looked at a number of them. And a lot of times people will do pump and treat, let's say, to stop a plume of contamination. But this is kind of a interesting area because there's only like I don't know, 1,500 to 2,000 feet, and to put in a well that would pump the plume out would have to be a fairly large well, and then you have to consider, well, that's right next to the Mar well field, which is pumping, and you don't really want to distract that pumping amount. So they toss that out. So they did look at each different option. There was an option that you could have done something in situ where they could have pumped carbon, kind of colloidal carbon, into the ground to absorb it, but they chose not to really evaluate that much detail. So the LSP would have gone through that and come up to with the conclusion, well, we'll just letting it go is the best option, and that gets submitted to the DEP and the town. And there was basically I don't know that there was any comments on it. I was actually not notified of the availability of these reports when they were moving forward through the holiday season. So the decision was concluded by the contractor and then submitted to DEP. DEP did not take any exception to it, and there was no real public comment. And actually, that was kind of a fault, I think, of the airport. It is a public information site under the regulations, and I really think there probably should have been some community opportunity for input. But that's how it happened, and that's where we're at. I don't know, whether the town has worked with the airport for a quid pro quo to obtain potential funding from their budget to the town budget to underwrite or the building or the treatment costs for it. And I think Dan might have alluded to that at a meeting at the Greater Hyannis Civic Association, but I'm not aware of any details. So really is not really the conclusion was made, and it was made fast, and it was accepted, and there really hasn't been any public comment. But
Yeah,
in
thank
some
you. No, it just seems curious because you went into such great detail in your presentation. You drew those giant plumes on your slides, and then you wiped them out by cleaning them up, and one after the next. And then apparently this fire training one will also be cleaned up. It sounds like you were hinting towards that after the conclusion of phase 2 or something. And then it just seems curious. That's all I can say. I don't understand. So if the contractor recommended it and then DEP said, yeah, sounds good to us, then it's done.
Yeah, unless there's a reason to revisit it. These decisions are always open for they're always open for revisiting if there becomes a need for it. Like each and every contamination event, we thought we were done with it with the petroleum, then the MTBE came, then the perchlorate came, then PFAS. PFAS is a lot different though than a lot of those things that we dealt with. It's much more diffuse, and the levels of concern at parts per trillion, and those other plumes we were dealing with parts per billion, which is a big difference. So we have these dilute plumes that are pervading through a lot of the aquifers, not only here in Hyannis, but from the Joint Base Cape Cod, and Chatham is dealing with it as well. And a lot of them are just dealing with the immediate thing is to break the exposure, public health exposure, and put the money there to treat the water, and try to figure out what to do next. And
Okay.
it's a big problem.
I guess my final question, the surface water regulatory structure is that a chicken and egg? I mean, who's pushing that, or nobody's pushing it to have any kind of regulation of surface water and contaminant levels?
I think there's a lot of people looking at it. It's just you have to look at it from both public human health and ecological health as well. And as a matter of fact, they're doing part of the fire training is they're doing an ecological risk assessment on Flint Rock Pond, which has some of the highest concentrations I've seen in surface waters on the Cape. So they'll be coming up with some type of approach for that. But in a regulatory sense, like the state of Minnesota, the land of 1,000 lakes, they have a really low limit that they were looking at. As a matter of fact, it was down at 4 nanograms per liter, but I'm not sure what the ramifications for that are. So even Aunt Betty's Pond, or Mill Creek that has these concentrations, it would be extremely, we don't have a threshold that's acute that demands action at this time.
Thanks for that question, Betty. And as I mentioned, maybe there's a chance for another bite at the apple through the airport master planning process. So I encourage you to follow that. I know Sierra Cape Cod will. David Dow, you had a question. I think this will be the last question. Unmute yourself, please, David.
Recently, I participated in EPA's public hearing on their PFAS maximum contaminant level, and many of the people felt that the polluters should pay for this and not the communities. Now, I was wondering whether, since most of this is carried out under the Safe Drinking Water Act, if these sites were identified under RECRA or CERCLA Superfund, whether the polluters would have to pay and not the communities.
I think that's
Okay.
a great question. I'll start and Tommy can add. Good to see you too, David. Thanks for all your support for our work over the years as well. Yeah, I mean, we've focused a lot on the Safe Drinking Water Act and adding PFAS with maximum contaminant levels, but EPA is also thinking about adding, and in the process of, I think, adding PFAS and PFOA as hazardous substances under CERCLA. So I do think that's one path to getting polluters to pay. I think that will take a while to put that into place, though. But that could be part of it. And there's also talk about adding it to RCRA and designating PFAS for hazardous waste. So I think those are steps in the right direction, but I totally agree. Places like Hyannis, where basically ratepayers and residents are paying millions of dollars for clean water. I hope there's a way to get the polluters to pay for that.
Tom, you want to have any remarks on that, or are you good to go?
Laurel handled that very well. Thank you.
All right, well, great. Thank you, everybody, again for coming, and thanks to you especially to Tom and Laurel for presenting tonight, and hopefully illuminating some of the issues and some of the sort of continuing needs we have to help address this problem going forward. Sierra Cape Cod will be following this issue, and will definitely let people know about opportunities for public comment and public engagement going forward. So again, thanks for coming, and have a great night.
Thank you, Chris and Keith, everybody. Good night.
Thanks.
Good night.